the Lord, everybody. Welcome back to another episode with myself and my wife, Ashley. We are the Grizzles, and we are so excited to be back with you again.
Yes, we are. It has been a few weeks of just busyness.
Busy.
But we're excited to have another episode.
Yeah, excited. Amazing things are happening.
Yeah.
Book just released a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
So if you are interested in that, you can find it on Amazon. Type Navigating the Noise and then by Evan Grizzle. You can find it there, or go to truthbook.co. Shout out to Truthbook Co. to helping me get that released. So it's all about navigating and dealing with criticism in the church. And yeah, hopefully, prayerfully, it'll be a blessing to you. So if you're interested in that, like I said, please go check that out. And we're excited. We're going to talk about a book today. Actually, we're going to talk a little bit about it and kind of expound on some of the ideas. Something that my wife had found several months ago, maybe a year ago.
Yep.
Incredible book, incredible insights. And the title of the book is Managing Leadership Anxiety by Steve Cuss. He is an author, leader, pastor, I think, from Australia. And, you know, it's just a really good book dealing with just how to navigate those waters of dealing with leadership issues and anxiety. So talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. I found the book a few months ago, and it really had a big impact on me because just a couple of things. He shared some of his experiences. He was a chaplain that worked in the hospital, and he encountered all kinds of emergency situations all of the time. And he was sharing his own inner dialogue while these situations were taking place. And kind of the first thing that I thought we could talk about a little bit is I remember him sharing in the book that this family in the hospital, they were just going through this like horrific experience. And he remembers going in there. He's the chaplain, and he's feeling like he needs to fix this situation for them. Like he needs to somehow undo what is going on in their family, or somehow put the magic Band-Aid on there and just instantly make them feel better. And that feeling of helplessness, am I equipped for the job? What do I need to say? How do I need to act? What do I need to do? And it really resonated with me because as a leader, we find ourselves in all kinds of situations all of the time. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I feel the pressure of, well, I need to say the right thing, do the right thing. How can I fix this for them? And I think that's a pretty common thing.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially for people in leadership.
Yes.
You know, I remember it was several years ago. I was asked to be a judge for a high school senior's thesis that he wrote, and he wrote on hell, which very informational. And then at the end, you know, we got to ask him questions so he could defend it. At the end, the crowd got to ask questions, and I remember sitting there, and they were asking this 18-year-old guy questions, and I remember thinking, I have the answer. I have the answer.
Yeah.
I have the answer. And then something just struck me, and I was like, I cannot be the guy in the room that always has the answer.
Right.
Like, there's going to be times where you don't have an answer.
Yes.
Or the answer that you have may not be the best thing to share with them right then.
Right.
And then what happens is we carry this weight of needing to have an answer. I should have an answer for this. Not always.
Yes. Well, and one of the things that he talks about in the book, which we have talked about, and we've talked about even personally, is having a healthy sense of differentiation of, okay, just because someone is experiencing heightened emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, frustration, whatever the situation might be, that sometimes we can take those emotions on and take on the emotions personally when that's not really what we're called to do as leaders.
No, that is an incredibly important distinction right there. Like it's one thing to help someone through theirs. It's another thing to take theirs on, and in just a second, maybe you can talk about how to know if you are taking them on. I think that because sometimes we can do that without knowing it.
Yes.
But like I worked in the hospital for, long time. I don't remember how long. To counting clinicals, it was, well over a decade. And the thing about being in the hospital, I worked as a respiratory therapist. I had to go to Code Blues nightly. A Code Blue, someone's actively trying to die is how you explain that. And the thing about it is whenever you're in those situations, the worst thing you can do is be emotional.
Yeah.
In high stress situations, the worst thing you can do. I've watched doctors kick people out of rooms because they're emotional, because they're carrying so much emotion. And because what happens is if you are at a heightened level of emotion, your ability to reason is gone. And very simple tasks and very simple directions don't work. People they hear them, but they don't understand what they're saying, right? Like they're like, oh, and then they'll get the wrong medicine, or like you make mistakes when emotions are high.
Okay. All right. Before I talk about how to recognize like that, okay, that's a big thing that you've touched on, because I read a portion of a book a few months ago. I think it was called The Emergency Mind, and it was about an emergency room doctor kind of sharing like how the mind works in those types of situations. Don't hold me to it on the name of the book. But okay, so can you relate that to leadership? Because leaders, pastors, find themselves in very escalated or very tense situations. So maybe take what you've learned from the medical field and apply it to that type of a situation in the church and how you have to approach those types of situations.
Yeah, the first thing is don't retreat.
Yeah.
Right? The only way I learned those things was by being in those situations over and over. I mean, it was nightly almost that we had a code, and it was always at the end of the shift, right after about 2.5 hours after the nurse said they last checked on them, and they probably really didn't because just they were cold and blue, and you're like, there's no way you checked on them 2 hours ago, and so it was like shaped in me in those moments of the first thing you have to do is think critically, right? And if you're a pastor that's never dealt with emergency situations, now there's a flip side to that. People are adrenaline junkies, and your adrenaline's going, and it's hard to go to bed after you've gotten home from a 12-hour shift and you just came off. You're a little shaky, jittery after codes and getting off work, and that's the thing that we run into is that you can become an adrenaline junkie. You're a firefighter. People say, "Well, I just love helping people." Mm-hmm. No. People's problem, another word for people's problems is drama.
Yes.
Right? And we'll jump from drama to drama to drama to drama. And what you have to do is you can't become addicted to it. You can't be an adrenaline junkie and get it's borderline savior complex, but it's not even that you have to save them. It's just that you get into a place where dopamine and adrenaline are hitting because you're helping people.
Yep.
So the first thing you have to do is you have to take a breath.
Yeah.
And you have to think. Like, I always, if the situation is tense, or let's say the person's calling me and it's like, I'm leaving my wife, I'm leaving my husband, I'm getting ready to move, I'm not coming back to church. Like, think about all the heightened problems we could hear.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
The first thing you have to do is take a breath. Mm-hmm. The second thing I do is ask a question.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Okay, how did we get here? The more you keep them talking, the more time you have to think.
It's good.
Because like she said, when we get into a situation, we feel like we have to have an answer. You first, before you can have an answer, you have to fully understand the question.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, because I've ran into it like where I assume and I come with an answer, and then I'll share that, and they're like, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. And then you're just saying like, well, doggone, I've been thinking about it this way for a long time.
That's good.
That's not the answer. The answer is ask a question. There's a book called The Coaching Habit, and I for the life of me, I can't remember who wrote it. If you Google that or look it up on Amazon, look up The Coaching Habit. It was written by a manager leader in a corporate setting.
Yeah.
But they ask questions to be a better coach. They coach people to be better.
Yeah.
The same thing applies here. You're coaching people through their problem, and the only way to coach them through their problem is to ask them the questions. First question I'll ask, okay, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Chances are that's going to be a really long answer. I'm going to give you plenty of time to hear a story and figure out where you're at in this mix.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about, and this, now granted, this was years ago, and my medical terminology is terrible, but as a respiratory therapist, sometimes a doctor would come in and kind of make an extreme call, and as the RT in the room, you would say, I don't think that that's necessary. The patient will recover a lot faster if we do this.
Yeah.
But because it seemed like they would be quick to want to trach, is that right? They would be quick to want to do certain procedures.
Yeah.
And you would sometimes advocate and say, I don't think we need to do that yet.
Well, we had one doctor in particular that was quick to change to a certain type of mode, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Let me give you a short answer for a long that could be a long, is that this doctor assumed that every person had some type of trauma in their lungs, damaged trauma.
Yeah.
And there's normal mechanical ventilation, and then there's trauma ventilation, and trauma ventilation is a lot different.
Yes.
And this guy would come in and he'd just start switching settings. And finally, one night, I just had enough. And I was like, I did what they call it ABG. It's a blood gas that checks their levels because the breathing can regulate those levels with other things. And his blood gas was awful after the doctor changed the settings. I sent him to him and he said, that's next shift's problem. And it was the middle of the night. And I'm like, no, you did this. We got to fix this. Well, he got mad at me and tried to get me wrote up. I wrote in the chart that the doctor said X, Y, and Z. Like, and I hope we're getting to the answer of what you're looking for is like, we do advocate, right?
Yes.
That there's going to be times the person in the room, because I had a unit. This doctor had all the units. He has a 30,000 foot view. I'm with them.
Yes.
I've checked on them 8 times or 4 times this shift. If this is my last shift, I've probably been with them 3 days in a row.
Yeah.
And so for the last 36 hours out of 72, I've been with them, looking at them.
Yep.
And so those people sometimes can have a better answer than the person that really makes the decision.
So what I was going for there is I've heard you many times say that sometimes a doctor will come in and make an extreme call, whereas a less extreme call can help the patient long-term make a quicker recovery and return to normal functioning a lot faster.
Yeah.
Their recovery rate is faster if you don't go straight to the extreme.
Right. Well, I remember one night in particular, there was a student doctor at the college, or the place that I worked at was a teaching hospital. And he was in his last year of residency, so he had residents with him. I'll never forget it. We got this lady in. The attending said, "You'll never save her." And with the attendings, like the chief on like the intensivist that's on that night that everybody reports to. And the student goes, "Can we try?" And so what the student did was he came into the room and he asked the questions with the people that had hands on them.
That's good stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, he's sitting there going, I think we can do it. Okay, let's do this, this, and this. What do you think?
That's good
When
stuff.
a doctor says, what do you think? You're like, that means a lot.
Yeah.
Because
good stuff.
you're there with them. And the doctor, and this is no joke, in 12 hours, no, it was 8 hours. Because we got her, this lady, about 2 to 4 hours into the deal. We did last rounds at about 4 o'clock, between 4 and 5 in the morning, last ABGs before the night's over. And we fixed her. She walked out. And then one doctor had given up.
That's amazing.
And it just, I remember being like, we can do this.
Yeah.
You know, it was weeks. She was in the hospital weeks, if not months, but we did it. And it's like, you're in the room.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to get more information.
Yeah.
Not all. Dear God, I figured out I don't want to know everything.
Right.
But sometimes talking to multiple people, I just had that happen this week. I talked to one person in a situation. I talked to the other person in a situation, and it's two different views. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we are quick
Yes.
to pick a side.
Yes. That's good.
And I always tell married couples, I'm not dumb enough to think that there's not two sides.
Sometimes that was so good. I think there's so many leadership principles to extract from that. And sometimes what we do is we will be quick to make a call to alleviate maybe even our own anxiety of like, hey, this needs to be fixed right now. This needs to happen. And we'll just be like, this is what it is. And it's a very rigid thinking approach.
Right.
Whereas if we slow down, take some time to really assess what is going on and not jumping in and overcorrecting a situation.
That's the risk you run.
Yes.
And overcorrection, here's the other part, is we had in that one situation in particular, in every situation, but in that one I talked about, we saved that woman's life.
Yeah.
We could have killed her.
Yeah.
Because the stuff that we were doing was counterbalancing what she had. If we hadn't checked back in to see if she had regulated, we wouldn't have known when to stop counterbalancing.
That's good.
Because we were giving the body time to regulate.
That's good.
And that's another lesson in that, is that we want things to fix quickly. Yep. With people, there are very rare. If it's a quick fix, I venture to say you probably forced it.
Yeah.
And it won't stick. That person will have another problem, and they'll be looking for another quick fix.
That's right.
But if you give them the tools,
yes, that's good. That's really good.
They can walk through it by themselves. That's discipleship.
100%.
Discipleship and parenting is not that we fix it for them; it's that we give them the tools to fix it themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I love that, because one of the things that the book talks about, and I think I like kind of just highlighted it, is it talks about group dynamics. And as leaders, it's not so much what the group is saying, but understanding how groups are relating to each other.
Yeah.
And it took me back to when I was in school and I did an intensive class on group therapy. And then I've ran different group sessions, especially when I was doing my clinical hours. And how group dynamics work is extremely interesting, because if you pay attention to group dynamics, you can see that sometimes you think that one person is running the group, but there is usually a silent member that is running the group through a look, a passing comment, through maybe going to other people and setting the dialogue. And so as leaders, stepping back and watching how people interact with each other, especially if you're trying to bring change into your church or into your organization, people really resist change. And so stepping back and saying, okay, how does this group relate to each other? Who do I think it has a lot of influence, but who is holding the actual influence of the group is really important.
Yeah, yeah. And as a leader, recognizing that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I have been known to be very direct and very quick.
Yeah.
To be direct. And sometimes that's an answer. Sometimes that's not the right answer, right? I worry pastors can fall, leaders in religious organizations can fall very quickly into the trap of bringing eternity into the mix, to the point that we are afraid to act because of their eternal their salvation.
Yeah.
And I've come to a place where I agree that needs to be taken to prayer, but sometimes we can be too slow to act.
That's right, because we're afraid.
We're people pleasing. And if fear is ever a factor, then I can tell you it is not of God.
I remember, and speaking of leadership anxiety, I've thought about this story today, and it really kind of resonated with me, and just showed me kind of a different place that I am now. I remember a few years ago, you had asked me to talk about a little topic, and it wasn't a big deal. I was on the floor at church. I think it was a Wednesday night, and I was just sharing a couple little things about a topic. It wasn't a big thing. It was just very low key, very laid back night. And I had just shared it and felt great about it. Thought it was awesome. Felt like it was, the lesson went well, all that. But I still had a lot of anxiety about teaching or speaking anyway. And so I remember someone calling me and saying, well, how did the lesson go? And I was like, well, I think it went great. And then that person said, well, what do you think so-and-so thought about it? And of course, now I look back and I think, okay, so there's a couple things going on with that scenario. One, I felt good about it. But that person had a lot of anxiety about what a particular person thought about it, because they knew maybe that person had a belief about women speakers.
Had a preconceived bias.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they took their anxiety and they put it on to me, hit me with it.
Did you get anxious?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Immediately. I immediately got anxious.
What was my answer?
I think it was that stupid. Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't give a rip.
Yeah. It's so, so what happened was, and if I had known then what I had known now was like, hey, this is this person's anxiety.
Yeah.
This person believes that the person that they were mentioning held a lot of power and influence. So it's a pretty strong possibility that they were giving that person a lot more power than they actually had. And me not having a healthy sense of differentiation there, I took on the anxiety. And then I started getting worried about, oh my goodness, well, does this person hate me now? Is this person going to be mad? Is this person going to leave the church? And think about it. How many times have we done that because of someone's look, someone's response, maybe a comment, and we never clarify, we never address, we just go overboard trying to placate a person and make sure everything's okay.
Here's what's funny about that. I have been guilty of that.
Yeah, me too.
But I've also got a lot of, I don't care in me.
Yeah.
Like, it's really weird. And here's the thing. I used this story recently, and it's kind of the analogy that maybe God gave me. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking through. And, a tree will start to grow. And as a tree grows, you can put ropes on it and make that tree grow in a specific direction, right? Mm-hmm. And you pull tension and it makes it grow, and it'll grow, and it always grows up toward the sun, but you can pull it, right? And sometimes people in churches are like that tree.
Yeah.
And there's people around you that will put their ropes to it.
Yeah.
And try to pull you.
Yeah.
In that direction.
Yes.
And by the grace of God, this is what's happened to me. By the grace of God, prayerfully, what will happen is you will cut those ropes, or God will cut those ropes.
Yeah.
Because it's never God's will for us to grow in a direction that's not God ordained.
That's right.
It's not about pleasing people. It's about pleasing God. The whole duty of man is fear God.
Yep.
Keep his commands.
Yes.
And if you do those two things, you're going to treat people well.
Yes.
And we get so much anxiety about that. And then we're like, well, we're going to hurt people. Here's what I've figured out. The hurt doesn't come when you cut the rope. The hurt comes if that tree has not grown in that direction enough. Those fibers are very elastic. And what they'll do is if the tree's big enough, it'll just violently swoosh.
Uh-huh. That's good.
And the return to plumb is what hurts people. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, well, I thought this, I thought that, I thought. And then the problem is God's saying grow this direction and people are saying do this. And it's that tension between those two things. If you will stay here,
Yes.
how can it hurt people? Because it's just growing toward God, right?
One of the things that makes it so hard is if you have people around you that are driven by anxiety and people pleasing. And if you are called leader, if you're a pastor and God has called you to lead the church in a vision and a way forward, and people do not like change, we will do anything we can to stop change because it's uncomfortable, it's painful. And so when you start and I'm not talking about being unwise in change or being reckless. I'm not talking about any of those things. But if you start pushing change, even in small ways, there are going to be people and go, oh, I don't know about that. You know, I think so-and-so is going to be mad about that. Or, oh, man, I think we ought to pray before we do that. I feel something in my spirit. And
I love hearing that one.
What you feel is probably not the spirit. It's your anxiety of, I want to make people happy.
Yeah.
And people's happiness with you is not an indicator that you're doing the right thing.
Never.
That is not, because as human beings, we do not want to grow and change because it's painful and uncomfortable. And we will do anything that we can to stay in the same spot. And as a leader, we have to differentiate ourselves from taking on all of that anxiety and walk in boldness and firmness and love to those people.
Firm but kind.
But knowing like, hey, this is what I'm here to do, is to lead us in the direction that God is calling us to go.
It was Ezekiel 13 that he said, God told Ezekiel, say to the prophets of Israel, and he gives them 3 indictments. He said, you followed after your own heart, you followed after your own spirit. You've prophesied from your own heart. You've seen vanity and lying divination.
Yes.
And I have watched, it has been at least twice in my ministry as a pastor that people have come to me with what they felt like were grave concerns that I never felt.
Yes.
And upon a polling of people that I trust, they didn't feel.
Yes.
And people can prophesy from their heart.
Yes.
If their heart is full of anxiety and fear, that's where the prophecy is coming from. And I could explain those two situations. Both times, those people ended up not being here any longer.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful that we don't speak from a place of anxiety. Mm-hmm. Right? I think that's super, super important because at the end of the day, let's say if you're a pastor, this is not it's not your church. They're not your people.
That's right.
They're God's.
Yes.
And if you are following after him, he is going to take care of them.
That's right.
You know, I will trust the voice of someone. I will listen to the voice of someone that I trust that carries the vision of the church.
Yes.
And a burden for it.
Yes.
If those two things, and even then I have to parse it out sometimes because the human emotion can be a factor. But if you do not carry the vision and the burden of the church, while I love you, I probably don't want to. I'm not going to adhere or follow a piece of advice or a command because it doesn't align.
That's right.
Like there's a lot of times, to be frank, there's a lot of times where what we do is to counteract what we don't want to become.
Yes.
Right? And we have to be careful that we're not doing it to counteract, but we're doing it offensively to say, this is what we're doing because this is who we're becoming.
Yes.
Because if it's ever rooted in what we don't want to become,
yes,
it's a negative.
Yes.
But if it's rooted in what we want to become, it's a positive. And there's times like when you're trying to change a church culture, the negatives are all you have. So you try to pull away. Like when I say all you have, you might not have a fullest vision of what you want it to become or what God wants it to become yet, but you know it's not that. So you can start pulling away, and then God will unveil the vision of what it is to become, so you can start being proactive in that.
Yes.
But the key is to never bow to people. I will not bow to people that don't pray.
Yes.
When it comes to spiritual matters.
Yes.
Right? Like if you are my financial advisor, I hope you're apostolic and you pray, but if you don't, I don't care as long as you know what you're doing with my money.
Yes.
In the church,
yes,
it's about spirituality.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I think one of the perspectives of this book is that it does come from a family systems theory. And sometimes if you will look at the system, at the root of what is driving the actions and reactions of people is something that is very dysfunctional and not healthy.
Not healthy.
And if you let that be a driver in your leadership, I was sharing at Ladies Bible Study the other day that, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they had been enslaved. They had a bondage mentality. They didn't know how to be free. And so when we read all of the, like, really what we would say the boring scriptures of like God telling them how to live and so that they could be a light to the nations, that was God demonstrating his love, saying, okay, I'm not just bringing you out of slavery. I'm going to show you and teach you how to live an abundant life. And that's what God's Spirit does for us.
Well, if you want to keep someone in bondage, you keep them uneducated.
And you keep them depending on you.
Why do you think our government's so big on government handouts?
You keep them depending on you. But when you encourage people to come out of dysfunction, to come out of families that are enmeshed where one family member can't separate their emotions from another family member, those types of things, people get very upset because it presses in on a function that they've been living in for a very long time. But God has not called us to live in that and to grow a healthy church. It is going to press in on some of those dysfunctional dynamics and is very uncomfortable for people. And that's why leaders have to be resolute in love and kindness. Just like I think I heard I've heard a lot of preachers say this, but if you come to them and say, well, people are saying blah, 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 blah. And they say, if you don't have names for me, I'm not even going to talk to you about it because it's not worth my time if you're coming at me. I want to say the author of this book, Steve Cuss, calls it the Phantom Strikers.
Yeah.
Which is a great name.
Well, here's my opinion of that. If your opinion is not important enough to put your name to it, then it's not that important.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
And if people come to me and like, I've been feeling X, like, okay, let's talk.
Yes.
But I do not like when people don't use that.
Yes.
Because I'll tell you the truth. A lot of times what those people are doing is projecting what they feel onto other people.
Yes.
And it's confirmation bias. They hear something they think is applicable to what they're feeling, but it's really not.
Yes.
And being careful in that and wise in that. And surely we don't push away everything. But I will tell you this, God, as the pastor of the church, the watchman on the wall, God is not going to tell someone in the church something about the church that the pastor would miss if he's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
That's right. That's right. Well, and it's funny because this is a denominal guy talking about it. Steve Cuss, when he was talking about kind of these dynamics and group dynamics, he said there's always that person that feels like in every church that they have to protect the church from the pastor. And so they will just go in on the pastor. And this is not an apostolic guy saying this, but he's sharing all of these different types of dynamics that you see in the church. And he's like,
he's talking about it. He talked about that in the context of transitions, right?
In transitions, but also in like group dynamics, there can come this person that's like, I need to save the group from the leader. And it's highly dysfunctional. They're very driven by anxiety and just need for control and but they're always like, hey, the leader, and I'm gonna save the group from the leader. And it's like, hey, like this is this is who the church brought in as the leader. It's very interesting.
Well, more than that, it's who God brought in.
Yes, it's the
so
appointed.
why would you fight against God?
Absolutely.
You know, that's an interesting thing. I think too, like, I don't know, we're probably close to needing to wrap up. Like, if we're not careful, I'm trying to think about a good way to say this. I am okay being blamed for good things.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes, like my wife said, when people, like, I've heard people say, well, Pastor Grizzle hasn't done everything right. You're exactly right.
Oh, for sure. We have not.
But their version of right is based on
their perception.
Their perception or the previous culture.
That's right. That's right.
The problem with right and wrong, if it's not based on Scripture, is it is very subjective.
Yes.
And so when people are looking at you like you're wrecking this, you're doing that, like if you're doing it scripturally, then that's okay. Because you're doing what God wants. And it's not God's will that people live in dysfunction, as my wife said. He brought them out and he brought them to promise, but a whole generation had to die because they didn't trust him.
That's right. One of the best things that we can do as leaders, and actually as just people in general, I give this advice a lot to myself and then in counseling as well, is we allow people to sit with their anxiety, their tension. It's really important. And it's not that you don't love them through it, but if they're able to come say, hey, I think, and I'm just going to use a crazy example, the way we move the chairs around at the sanctuary, like God is not pleased with that. Like I have a stirring in my spirit. These chairs should not be like this. And it's kind of like, well, I appreciate you letting me know. I will pray. And, maybe that's not your response and that's fine. But not taking on that anxiety, you letting them sit with that. Because when you take it on, they're good. They've taken their anxiety and they've thrown it on you. And now you're up all night. You're, worried half to death, fasting for 3 weeks straight over chairs. But if you allow them to sit with their tension, with their anxiety, then what God is doing, and he is bringing them to a place of challenge where they can either choose to stay in dysfunction or God is giving them a chance. He is pulling them to grow through that anxiety. Mm-hmm. And do we want to be people that stop people from God doing a growing work, a transformation in their life? I don't want to be an enabling leader that allows people to just sit in their dysfunction because I'm like, you go ahead and be dysfunctional. I'll just support you in that. No, I love you enough to not take on the dysfunction for you and allow God to do what he does, because I can't fix it for you. But I know that God is bringing you to this point of tension and hardness because he wants all of us to grow and be transformed. Yeah,
that's the point, isn't it? Is to be transformed. And anxiety can keep you from that.
Yes.
It'll be a barrier. It'll be a prison, really.
Yeah.
It'll hold you from growth. So, if any of these things hit home, we encourage you to pray about them.
Yes.
To really, really pray about them. And to find someone that's trusted, a friend that you could talk to and say, I'm seeing this. This is similar to this. And finding somebody that can kind of walk through it with you, it becomes important.
Knowing your own triggers, knowing if there's certain situations where you tend to play it safe.
Yeah.
Rather than step out in faith in what God's calling you to do. If you identify those situations in advance, then you'll be prepared with the right accountability in place, that when you're tending to play it safe, you'll have some people in your life that say, hey, I see it. You're playing it safe because you're scared of whatever this is. You need to push forward. This is what the vision is. Let's go. Let's keep going.
That's it. Anything else?
No.
Well, we've had a good time talking to you guys today. As always, it's an honor to be on the Biblos Network. We are excited about what God is doing throughout this region, this world, our city, your city. We're just believing God for even more. And we hope that this episode helped you manage your leadership anxiety. God bless, and until next time.